There are still numerous and powerful groups, sects and movements that are dedicated to the study of the occult and the supernatural. Renewed by the acuteness of the crisis of the Western world, such currents bring together many adherents. For example, spiritualism alone has millions of individuals affiliated to its sects. Exotic doctrines of all kinds come to us imported, presenting extraordinary and mysterious gurus, while exerting a great attraction. It may well be said that every intruder finds a place in the realm of spiritualism, such as in all diverse adaptations of yoga, in all varieties of spurious mysticism, occultism, Masonic lodges, Neo-Rosicrucianism, pantheistic, naturalistic and primitive regressions, neo-Gnosticism, astrological ramifications, parapsychology, spiritualist mediums and so forth and so on. Not to mention all that is pure mystification. In general, it is enough for anything to escape from what is normal, or to present exceptional aspects about the occult, the mystical, or the irrational, so that a great number of our contemporaries may be passionately interested in it. Finally, even modern science has fallen into such ambiguity, as can be seen in some of its branches, such as psychoanalysis and the so-called the psychology of the depths, where it has ended up in promiscuous evocations along the frontier regions of the I and the conscious personality. The following paradox has also been perceived: quite a few representatives of those positivistic disciplines who, in order to justify themselves and associate together, systematically denied any worldview containing supersensitive elements. It was precisely these representatives who in separate sectors ally frequently with primitive forms of neo-spiritualism. And then the reputation that their seriousness has achieved in the domains of their scientific competence, is used exaggeratedly as to guarantee these neo-spiritualist forms, and becomes a dangerous instrument of seduction and propaganda. In terms of spiritism, it has been paradigmatic the case of the physicists Crookes and Lodge. This way, vast sectors of the Western world are fostering a spiritual chaos that strangely resembles the Asian world of Hellenic decay. Not even all sorts of messiahs are present in several editions and kinds. But above all, it is necessary to find orientations and see what the main causes of the phenomenon are. As a first notable feature, a general impulse towards evasion can be pointed out. In this respect, neo-spiritualism possesses indeed traits analogous to all that which modern man uses in order to escape from the world around him, to free himself from the asphyxiating forms assumed by the civilization and culture of the modern West, even in extreme cases, in terms of the use of drugs, anarchic explosions, mass pseudo-liberation of sex, dark and various kinds of neurotic compensation. With this criterion, however, there are still present some motivations where a partial legitimacy cannot be totally ignored. In fact, the principles of neo-spiritualism are contemporary to all those who still hold a materialist positivist position in regard to man and the world, in its extreme miserable and discouraging traits, adding rationalism to it, or the pretensions of abstract reason when publishing in series or regrouping all which regards to the deepest strata of the human being and the psyche. At the same time, it is necessary to point out the lack of forms present in a well-understood traditional civilization, capable of projecting effectively towards higher goals. In the Western world in particular, there was the resort to a religion, Christianity, yet religion itself has ceased to present itself as something alive, no longer offering standpoints related to a true transcendence, but rather being reduced, in the case of Catholicism, on the one hand to an inert theological dogmatic structure, and on the other hand to a pure devotionalism and morality having a bourgeois character. All this has reached such proportions that the death of God is commonplace, and there is the need felt to end the myths of religion in order to present the valid contents intended for social practice, as for example in the so-called atheistic Christianity. But if positive religion has thus decayed in the performance of its highest function, it seems to offer very little to those who, more than demanding a faith or a bourgeois, social, moral indoctrination of man, sought, though rather under veiled forms, for an experience of spiritual liberation. The subversive maxims of the last ideologies according to which the beginning and the end of man are to be exclusively found on this earth, thus claiming as a goal a society of mass production and well-being destined, on the other hand, to become tasteless and fastidious through mutilations of the personality, and at the cost of many restrictions. Such subversive maxims could not but arouse, finally, discontent and rebellion. Unless there are no processes of radical degradation, the need for the other still remains, and, in the limit, the need for the supernatural as well, which cannot be suffocated at all beyond a certain limit. In recent times, the tourniquet has been closed in terms of the factors just pointed out. Hence the emergence of the impulse in all those who have believed to find an escape or relief through what is proposed as a novelty in neo-spiritualism, by means of ideas that apparently give access to a much wider reality, not only theoretically, but above all, as a lived spiritual experience. The fact that in recent times it has been recognized, though sporadically, the existence of something foreign, this is, something out of the ordinary, as a manifestation of energies, laws and possibilities beyond those admitted in the preceding positivist period, has frequently constituted an ulterior fact for the particular orientation of the impulse towards the evasion trait we are concerned with. One last factor in this, which is no less important than the former ones, has been the diffusion of forms of knowledge no longer restricted to a specialized and higher culture, this is, doctrines of a predominantly an Eastern origin which promised much more of that which Western positive religions always seem to offer, especially in their last empty and distorted forms. This is, in short, the conditional conjuncture that can be attributed to the diffusion of neo-spiritualism, which, as we have already noted, presents in general terms the characters of what Oswald Spengler has called second religiosity, which is manifested not in the luminous and original period of an organic, qualitative and spiritual civilization and in the center of it, but rather on the margins of a twilight and decadent civilization. Spengler himself described this peculiar phenomenon with the following words: "The decline of the West after this, it is necessary to determine some fundamental points of reference that can help us clearly distinguish the different classes of neo-spiritualism or any other analogous currents. With this clarification, we must also emphasize that our interest in such neo-spiritualism is not confined to theory but rather encompasses the tendencies that, sometimes, without even realizing it, through spells reintroduce occult forces, putting individuals and groups in contact with them, thus cultivating strange and alien modes of consciousness. The point is, obviously, that such influences and modalities actually exist as well as the forms of physical reality and ordinary reality. In any case, all this is recognized by every normal and complete civilization, having been rejected only briefly by Western positivism. However, in our day, it is required something more than a simple recognition in psychological terms or, to be more exact, in terms of psychology, as occurs for instance, in the field of psychiatry and general psychoanalysis. As far as we are concerned, this spirituality must be understood in ontological terms, this is, precisely as a reality. Otherwise the problem of the danger of the spiritual, or of spiritualism, and of the extranormal cannot be solved or ended with the mere fact of covering it with a sufficiently common or vulgar character. One could speak of obsessions, paranoias and extravagances of unbalanced and twisted minds of whom there is no need to worry much about. Hence, we are referring here to personality in the proper sense. The treatment of the spiritual and its flourishing represent a fundamental risk for man, as it can impair his inner unity, his own dominion, his power of clear presence in himself, his transparent vision and autonomous action, which defines precisely the essence of a given personality. Personality is always standing on a solid ground in the world of tangible and quantitative things, of logical thoughts and conclusions based on pure forms and effective action, and in general all that which has relation to the physical senses and to the brain. On the contrary, in the spiritualist world personality runs a constant risk, descending into a problematic state, because in that world there is no longer any of the supports which such personality is accustomed to and which such personality required, since it still corresponds to a personality conditioned by a physical body. It is not a rare case that many of those who cultivate spiritualism today are men devoid of a crystal-clear personality. The large percentage of women is also significant, while those who have a strong and conscious personality hold firm to positivistic things, and nourish in regard to the suprasensible and invincible repulsion, prepared to create all kinds of alibis. It is necessary to understand well that such repulsion is nothing more than the unconscious manifestation of a certain instinct of spiritual defense. Weaker personalities, where such instinct is lacking or attenuated, are those willing to welcome and recklessly cultivate ideas, tendencies, doctrines and evocations without wanting to realize the danger present in them. These people believe that anything that transcends the world around them is something extraordinary, as if it were a sort of higher state. At the moment when the need for other arises in them, that is to say, the impulse towards evasion, they resort to all sort of means, often unaware that they are thus in the orbit of forces that are not superior but quite inferior in man, conceived as personality. The following is the fundamental point, to see clearly those situations in which, despite any appearance and mask, neo-spiritualism can actually have a regressive character, and the spiritual not to be something supernatural, but rather something infranatural. This is understood concretely and existentially, apart from all doctrinal and intellectual confusion and deviation. In order to have an idea of the influences which can also be treated when examining such crevice that is open towards the lower and not toward the higher, this is, a gap that is descending instead of ascending, it will be opportune to indicate what, in its vast and complete sense, must be understood by what is natural. When we speak today of the natural, it is generally understood the physical world, known through the physical senses of every knowledgeable person trained in the exact sciences. In reality, this is only one partial aspect of the natural domain, an image formed in relation to a specific human personality, and even more so in a certain phase of the historical development of such personality, due to its own experience and not to other possible phases and forms of existence. Man perceives the natural in the so defined forms of physical reality because he has separated himself, liberated himself and divorced himself from it to the point of feeling it as something external, as a kind of negation of the self. The natural domain, in itself, is not its appearance in space. On the contrary, it is trapped where that impression of exteriority is attenuated, correlatively reducing the condition of awakened lucid consciousness and being substituting by states in which the objective and subjective, inside and outside are confused. Here emerges the first domains of an invisible and psychic world, which, as such, are still natural. Moreover, they are eminently natural and yet by no means supernatural. Through an objective and scientific research on man's matter and energy, we find that in the background man moves in a sort of magical circle created by his own. Emerging out from such medium, the natural domain is approached only by he who descends from the perfected personal consciousness and subconscious along a path that begins with dark organic sensations, and with the emergence of complexes and automatisms that develop towards a free state, that is to say, that no longer are related to the controls of the brain, thus descending more and more to the depths of the physical subconscious. Some recent research has provided elements for determining this regression process even from a positivistic point of view. Through experimental local anesthesia it has been studied what happens in the psychic functions when the cerebral cortex strata are progressively neuralized, from the outer and more recent layers to the most internal and atavistic, completely discarding the action of the brain and activating the sympathetic system, which has been shown to be still linked to certain forms of consciousness. The first to disappear then are the concepts of space, time and causality, that is, the judgments on which the awakened experience of nature takes place, as well as the logical union of thoughts in the conscious personality. In regard to the deeper stages, The same ordinary and distinct consciousness of the I is weakened and is afterwards placed at the threshold of unconscious functions, in immediate relation to the vegetative life. This, precisely, is the end of the person and the principle of the impersonal, of nature. What ancient traditions have given the name of geniuses, elemental spirits, nature gods and similar terms, in addition to popular and folkloric superstitious attitudes and poetic contributions, was not only a fable, but was undoubtedly imaginations, that is, forms produced in certain circumstances by a faculty analogous to that which operates during dreaming in relation to the sympathetic system, dramatized in diverse ways as occurs usually in dreams, where the psychic shadows experience contact with many forces, of which the visible forms, elements, and laws of nature are but their manifestation. Likewise, phenomena of clairvoyance called natural, or symbolic clairvoyance, are linked to a neutralization and exclusion of the brain activity and to the supporting by a narrow consciousness that subsists in certain beings thanks to special circumstances, only in the sympathetic system. The main plexuses of such system, and especially the solar plexus, are then transformed into a center of sensations and substitute the brain function, exercising it without the aid of the physical senses in strict form, based on stimuli and sensations that do not come from outside but rather from within. Naturally, the results of this activity have a more or less direct character, that is to say, they are mixed with forms that used to drive and convert the conscious and are also modified by the space-time element typical of the brain. But, no matter how great are all the residues, there is still an incontestable margin of objectivity in such phenomena, which is sometimes confirmed also in a perspicuous way by the correspondence of the data provided by such medium with those under the control of physical perceptions chosen and organized by a vigilant conscience. This provides us a point of orientation. There is a whole psychic, hidden zone of ordinary consciousness, which is real in its own way, not a subjective illusion or hallucination, but that should not be confused with the spiritual in the hierarchy of values, and much less with the supernatural. With more reason we should speak here of the infranatural, and whoever opens passively, aesthetically to this world, actually descends, brings down the inner level from a higher degree to a much lower one. Every positive measure of true spirituality for man must be a clear, active and distinct consciousness, when objectively examining outer reality or when reordering the terms of any logical reasoning, any mathematical deduction, or when taking a decision in moral life. Its triumph, that is, what defines him within the hierarchy of beings is ultimately this. When, on the contrary, he transits through the domains of a nebulous mysticism, a pantheistic suspicion or phenomenology, no matter how sensational it appears, is effectuated the conditions of regression, psychic collapse, trance. There is no rise but descent in the levels of spirituality, passing from what is more to what is less in the field of the spirit. He does not sublimate chaos but becomes more reintegrated in it. Moreover, he becomes an instrument of the lower forces, restricted to their limited expressions. It is only after having seen this point clearly that the idea of a different and opposite spiritual direction can be pointed out, which serves to judge what can be valid in spiritualism and what can be also proposed to those who, having a particular calling and qualification, seek a transcendence. This is something much elevated than what the modern vision of man in the world offers, a space for a superior freedom beyond the limitations and the lack of meaning of today's existence, as well as beyond the same forms derived from religious practices. Initially, it is all about exposing the requirement of a path towards specific experiences that, far from reducing consciousness, transform it into superconsciousness, which instead of abolishing the discernment traits that are required to preserve in a healthy and knowledgeable man amidst so many material elements and practical activities, rather elevates him to a higher level, so that are not altered the principles that constitute the essence of a personality, but instead are rather integrated. The path to such experiences is what leads to what is truly supernatural. But this path is not easy nor attractive for most. It presupposes an attitude that is opposite to that which captivates all the spiritualism enthusiasts, who are only pushed by a confused impulse towards evasion. It presupposes also an attitude and a will to ascend, in the original sense of this word, very in opposition to the traditional meaning of monastic mortification. It is not easy to stimulate modern mentality to reflect and judge in terms of interiority, instead of in terms of appearance, phenomenon or sensation. Less easy is, after all biological, anthropological and evolutionary devastations, to lead back to what formerly was nominally still a Catholic teaching, that is to say, the dignity and transcendent destiny of the human individual. Now, this is precisely the fundamental point for ordering the things we are dealing with. Only a person with a right judgment can recognize effectively that in whatever is not exclusively material there is two distinct domains that in no case are opposed. What corresponds to forms of consciousness that are lower than the level of the waking state of the normal human person corresponds the natural order, in the broadest sense of the word. Only the other order corresponds to the supernatural. Man is situated between these two domains, and whoever is driven by a condition of ecstasy or that of a precarious balance can move towards one or the other. According to the aforementioned doctrine of man's dignity and supernatural destiny, such destiny does not belong to the natural domain or to the materialistic sense of evolutionism and Darwinism, nor to any spiritualist aim based on pantheism or other related conceptions. As a protected personality, a man can rise from the domain of mystical souls, things and elements, from the depths of a cosmic intuition through a clear vision of physical things, of raw contours, objectives and space, as well as his experience of accurate and logically chained thoughts. Such is already an expression of catharsis and liberation from such world, despite the limited horizons and the possibilities that derives from it. When instead a man descends from such domain, he then abdicates and betrays his supernatural destiny, his soul surrenders. He enters consciously or unconsciously down the descending path, while if faithful to his goal he would have been allowed to walk beyond any conditioned state, no matter how cosmic it might appear. At the end of these critical notes, many will feel disoriented, disillusioned in their desire for a comforting truth and an easy path, after the suggestions offered by so many modern sects and movements. It is possible that such disillusioned people might feel even disturbed by the traditional doctrines we have been forced to recover to make them known, in order to clarify several points. This could have indeed acted as a spoiler for many when having confronted both the sectarian spiritualists and their criticizers, yet we do not aim to attract neither group. This is notoriously what occurs when one intends to follow only the point of view of truth, forgetting all sentimental and irrational factors in regard to matters strongly linked to internal tensions. Anyone who complains about not having enough positive frameworks should consider the nature of the domains which we delved on. In order to say something that would be hopeful for the majority, we should have considered only the values that apply to the field of the visible domain and to what is normal, in the agreed sense of these terms, this is, to the closed and inferior zones that emerge in spiritualistic evocations, or even to the other domain, this is, the initiatory possibilities and disciplines of high contemplative ascetics, reserved for a very few individuals. We have referred to individual personality, in its human form, and referred to that which can fortify it in relation to the present state of civilization. The problem of the individual's worldview must be faced, because this is the beginning of everything. Also, in the order of a spirituality that is well oriented in itself, it is a severe error to believe that something serious can be achieved through isolated practices, without having changed radically and beforehand the way of feeling oneself, others, the world, and to have also changed, therefore, our self-same way of reacting. Much has been written in this field since the crisis of modern civilization was commonplace, yet almost always without any firm foundation. Indeed, there is only one possible way for the defense of the personality, and this is, once again, the traditional vision of the world and of life, together with an internal rebellion against the modern world. In our work, which has precisely this title, we have already provided everything we could offer in this direction, without going into the details typical of specialists. But in this book our task was various. It was essentially a matter of providing precise meaning to both directions, one towards the subpersonal and the other toward the suprapersonal. This is indeed the indispensable condition in order to orientate oneself against contemporary spiritualism, so that we can eventually realize what is a mask and that what is a face, to be able to overcome, on the one hand, Philistine prejudices, and on the other, the adulation of so many alleged revelations that occur on a daily basis. From the beginning, we have recognized that a broadening of horizons is now required. To insist on prejudices and limitations that still could have their pragmatic reason yesterday is no longer wise today. Moreover, they are even dangerous. In fact, they can produce the opposite effect, as experience has shown. This is especially true in the case of those who defend religious tradition in a narrow, habitual, devotional and conformist sense. We must repeat that they should understand that the time has come to wake up if they want to live a duty based on principles, as we strictly conceive tradition as something much more vast and universal, something much less human than all they know and affirm. And this is possible without causing any confusion, without weakening their positions but, rather, reinforcing them. Guénon, in his references to Catholicism, has made this point clear. Not only in this field, but through the preceding critical considerations, the horizons have expanded also to all other fields examined. It corresponds to a precise endeavor for those who have their eyes open to actively and opportunely prevent whatever can happen in this sense by uncontrollable forces. But then a test is imposed for modern men, that of desiring the limit that defines and sustains transcendence amidst these expanded horizons, learning how to calmly close many portals that, by the grace and work of Lucifer, are so interweaved that one can easily move above or beneath him. Let's repeat it once again. In most cases the personality is not a given fact but an endeavor. Today, in an era characterized by irrational, demonic and collective tendencies, there are too many forces necessary to fight and resist in order to approach such endeavor and to build a character and personal direction, in addition to withstanding all the dangers of spiritualism. Spirituality must be valued today as knowledge, not as a temptation. This should serve to put in place the pretensions of all science and scientism, as well as to render relative the importance of many values proper to a humanistic civilization, to remove fixed ideas and mental deformations established in the core of many disciplines, thus enriching their possibilities of development. Spirituality must also allow us to regain possession of precious parts of a forgotten and unknown heritage. This is, it must give us the chance of reading through the symbols and myths of the great traditions of the past, which is equivalent to awakening new spiritual senses. The truly spiritual must be felt as a present reality, not as an exceptional reality but a natural reality, not miraculous or sensational, but evident within the limits of a feeling of the world that is vaster, freer, more complete. It does not matter how far the truly supernatural is still from man. What matters are the clarity and the nature of knowledge. Reaching both would be already a lot accomplished. And yet, it would be nothing more than just a return to normalcy. To the extent that the new spiritualism could propitiate a disruption of such type, mainly due to its deceptive character and its self-betrayal in diverse forms, it would be worth referring to the Goethean statement when talking about those who do good in spite of wanting evil. In order to promote this transformation, the only alternative is to keep up the view of the traditional teachings that act as a rectifying and integrating counterpart of the current spiritualist ideas, including those of the pseudoscience of the unconscious. We have recently talked about the protective function determined by the traditional conception of the world, which is essentially unique in terms of its values and its fundamental categories and vision, which however admits several formulas and several expressions. Hence we may ask ourselves which of these formulas can constitute an aid for the man of today, when along broad horizons the supreme is to be considered. Perhaps most will think that the most effective assistance is Christian. We are not of this opinion. A formula of such type for the average man of today is either too much or too little. It is too little, if one takes the weakened type of Christianity, as said, extremely confessional and socializing. It is too much if addressed in relation to the tragic and desperate direction of the spirit, of which we have already spoken, a path that today would either not be felt or that could lead to dangerous imbalances. It is specifically emphasized here that we are dealing not with doctrinal or theological elements, but rather about a given formula that can provide an adequate and total vision of life. It is usual to emphasize what Catholicism presents for the defense of the personality. And, according to what has already been said, we ourselves have had occasion to agree in some aspects here and there. However, what has to be recognized positively are the values that Catholicism has not taken from Christianity during its origins, when characterized by a desperate pathos, a feeling of redemption and salvation, coupled with all sorts of suggestions and emotional complexes, and which all have been verified by the best currents of the classic tradition. And the question arises as to whether such values, such elements regarding a vision of life, are apparent and effective or not for the endeavor indicated formerly, once liberated from the superstructures of faith and dogma, and once reformulated according to their original trunk. We think this is precisely the case, that is to say, that a simpler, clearer, more neutral vision, free from spurious tendencies, can be drawn from the classical conception of life, which modern men can appropriate for the purpose of renewing and expanding their mentality. This can take place in an autonomous way, having no relation to any religious confession, or given theories or philosophies. Within the classical view of life, all demons and goddesses had their place, that is, the world was considered in its totality as comprehending both the infranatural and the supernatural. At the same time, as very likely in no any other civilization, the sense of personality considered as a force, form, principle, value, enterprise was still alive. Such conception was aware of the invisible, and in its center celebrated the ideal of culture, that is to say, spiritual formation, the genesis of the alive and the development of works of art. Concepts had, of course, an important function in classical ethics, that is, the function of a limit, which leads us precisely to what we said recently, this is, the fundamental requirement to actively and consciously circumscribe the scope in which one can be truly oneself and develop a balance and a partial perfection, hence removing the flatteries arising from all romantic and mystic static paths that lead towards the formless and unlimited. The classical man had no spiritual illusions. He was aware of the double destiny, the path of Hades and the way to the island of heroes, as well as the law of the debased world, the eternal cycle of generation, and at the same time knew a type of serenity, where the afterlife created no vertigo and the power of fact did not produce any anguish. He was aware of the intimate capacity